so many people know your work or might be immediately familiar with your work from film. Um, but I read that you were turned on to opera when you were young because a teacher told you opera was the movies before there were movies. That was the quote. So how does composing an opera compared to composing the score for a film?
Well, in the instance of creation, there's no difference, meaning that you have to have an idea where there isn't one, and that's a creative person's daily challenge. But in the conception of what the music's role is in this multimedia experience, it's actually very different. In People would go to the opera before there were movies and have the way in which why this teacher of mine said that is because before there were movies, people would go to the opera to have a multimedia creative experience that told stories in comedy and tragedy, and involved acting and singing and instrumental playing and costume design and production. But in opera, the music is expected to be the primary storytelling art. And in film, it's the film that is the primary storytelling art. And so all the others are in service of that one. And in any collaboration, you do need to know who the boss is because there needs to be a final decision. And so in opera, the music is all completed before any of the other collaborators come on board. And so the music serves as the blueprint. And occasionally the other arts reveal that the music needs to adapt to be able to have the story be told. For example, what's in OMAR, there are places where suddenly the way it was staged, it was like, oh, we need more time right here before this next part begins because this character is all the way on the other side of the stage and he can't come running over because why would he be running at this moment? It's very out of, and there needs to be a set change. And even though you anticipate those things when you write an opera, it's like, okay, well, if we're just in this location and in this next scene we're in Y location, what's going to happen on the stage? Is that going to happen? Is it going to pop like a film? No. The stage has to change, and you better write some music that accompanies that, or it's going to be silent or something. So anyway, you do those things, but the music still, when you stage it, the music sometimes needs a nip or tuck here to make it work. But the stage designers, they all start with the music as the blueprint of how the story is going to be told. In film, the blueprint is the script, first of all, but then the script gives way to the way the film is shot. It's really the director's medium, and the director is in charge. The director is the primary storyteller, and the director operates through first, uses the script as the framework, but then works with all the designers and the director of photography to shoot the film, and finally to edit it in a way that is not only visual, but also takes place in time. And the reason that music works so well with film is because they're both arts that take place over time. And it's a weird concept, but time is really the canvas of music, and it's the canvas of storytelling. There wasn't time, you couldn't tell a story because it's a journey. So the journey of music enhances the journey of filmic storytelling, but it's meant to enhance, not be the primary focus. So the music often comes as one of the very last elements of a film, because the film must exist in time. It must be edited together in some form before the music can begin to enhance what is already there. And then often the editing of a film changes a lot in the it's amazing how much storytelling is present just in the editing and the pacing of a film. But when that happens, the music invariably has to change to match the film, not vice versa. And the editing to the music happens maybe only 5 to 10% of the time. Most of the time, the music adapts to the way the pacing of the film as decided by the director. And the director also decides whether the music is working. It's not just the composer's vision. It's whether the director believes that the composer's vision is working according to the director's ears. And so there's a lot more, as much as the music feels like an equal co-partner in all of the production, the choices about how the music fits into the movie are made much more collaboratively and made with the director being the final say.
I love that. The other thing that strikes me about theater and film, opera and film, is film is there's a permanence to film. So if I watch Nope in the movie theater, or a friend of mine sees Nope in the movie theater a year ago, or when it was in theaters, and now I watch it on my television streamed, it's going to be the exact same piece. Whereas if I saw OMAR at the Spoleto Festival, there's a ephemeral quality about theater and opera that I think is so exciting. But does that change pacing? Does that change how you compose? Does that change how you approach a work for the stage, because there's this ephemeral impermanence to it, ephemeral quality to it?
That's an interesting question. I never thought about that. What occurred to me is that, well, yes, when you see Nope, you're going to see the same film. I would suggest that, art always takes place in the moment that it's created. Mm-hmm. And even when an art is attempting to be a period piece, it still takes place in the view of the year it was created, of that period, if you know what I mean. And so when someone who sees Nope in 10 or 20 years is going to be, I can say this about Get Out, which was, Get Out, I am blessed to be able to say I think it's going to be a film that's studied in the future, because it's such a textbook it's a perfectly made film, aside from what it said, aside from its messages. When you combine it with its messages, it becomes a film that you must study to understand film, American film. But how its jokes are going to land in the future are very different than how they landed in the year it came out, because how Get Out lands today, it being only 7 years later, is so much informed by culture that you could almost say that you're watching a different film than had you watched it, on the weekend it debuted. But even though in its parts it's exactly the same, but I think that the beauty of live performance is that even if you saw it last night, it's going to be different tomorrow night, just because of the nature of live performance. And that's, all of us who love live performance, that's one of the features of like, that's why you go back and see a show again, is part of it is to love the variation that happens with people creating a new experience for you. I don't think that can possibly influence how I write as a composer, because it's all the performers that bring that. When you're a concert music composer, I explain to people that it's a lot like being an architect, that architects don't build buildings, they make pictures of buildings. They draw pretty pictures of what you ought to do if you were going to make a building. Now, many of them go into the art of building the building, but the building of the building can be entirely separate. And the building doesn't exist on the page. It exists in the space when it's made for people to experience in the way that they can only when it's real. And that's how, the score to OMAR is just a blueprint. And it's how people bring that blueprint to life that make it what it is. And that's going to be as different from year to year or generation to generation as it is from night to night. And so I hope to live long enough to see, as much as I adore this production of OMAR and can't imagine any other production, I actually look forward to someday seeing another production, only just because of what I might get out of it and how I might experience the work. And if you notice, I'm speaking about it very much like I didn't even write it, because when you're experience it, when I experience it as an audience member, obviously I know it better than everyone, but at the same time, I'm enjoying experiencing it as an audience member. So
Do you feel the same way when you see the movie? I'm going to go back to the movies now. Do you feel the same way if you're sitting, flipping through the channels and Get Out is on or Nope is on? Do you feel the same way as you're watching those pieces?
I do, because I mean, when you first, when it's first complete, there is a tendency, at least for me, to be, we're always our own worst critics. And so I tend to be very self-critical of things. But there's a point that but I've also realized this early on when I thought, if that's all you're present to, you're going to miss the entire reason that you're an artist.
Mm.
Like, you're going to miss the entire reason that you would do anything that's difficult or challenging and so at what point are you going to allow yourself to have enjoyment? It's really up to you. And when presented with that, I know that at that point it's completely out of my control, and it's about the experience that the audience has. And I fully believe that even in a story like a film where you're being told what the plot is pretty literally, that your experience of that, that's truly what the experience is, like what the individual audience member perceives and gets out of a film or an opera or anything is what the experience is meant to be. So I do appreciate things as an audience member. And like, for example, with Jordan's work, Jordan Peele, he knows, I feel like he knows every single cultural reference that is possible. I don't know how he knows them, but I've just seen him. It's in his work, and it's in the way he speaks too. He gets every, something that occurs to you in one form, he'll see a relationship to something else that no one else would have seen. And so in his work, he shows you how he sees the interconnectedness of everything. And so seeing the world like he does, still get things. Like the second time I saw Nope completed, I got things from the story that I did not get having even worked on the film myself. And I love that I can get that out of his work. And you can tell that I thoroughly enjoyed that experience just as an audience member and an observer, even though I've participated very acutely in creating what it is.
That I think is the brilliance of his storytelling, his ability to tell story is just brilliant. Your compositions have been described as hip hop, classical, baroque, folk. I know in this piece, Omar, there's Senegalese influence and hymnal influences. How would you describe your musical style?
Well, I used to think that I didn't have one, and that was kind of a bad thing, because a lot of successful artists are known for a thing, and you can hear, oh, that's so, you can just tell the music came from so and so, and that's becomes on the artistic side, that's a thing that people really admire and are drawn to. But also on a business side, it's really good for business when you have a brand. So I used to worry that I didn't have that sort of identifiable thing, but then I came to realize that it's I'm like a prism through which all of our influences, like, people ask me, well, what are your influences? And I think, well, how do you not be influenced by every single thing you've ever heard? And now that we live in the technological age, how is it that you haven't heard everything? So I feel like if you're listening, you would be influenced by everything, and that would include everything, everywhere, But it comes down to, I have a perspective about what interests me in music. And if I hear that in any genre, I'm instantly interested in that genre. And or if I hear music I don't like in a genre, I think, well, what if it had the things that I like about music in it? What would that sound? Maybe then I would love the genre if it had the things about music that I like in it. And so you can just tell by that expression. I look at music like it's like a sonic Lego kit. Like, well, it could go together this way, or it could go to this part, could go over here, and wouldn't that be interesting? And so genres are fascinating because you can evoke them by pulling out the things that make people think of that genre, but I think of them as building blocks of music that I might stick to other things, and that therefore that idea of how to construct music that way, that's my brand. Like that's what that's what my genre is. And if you think of it that way, then when you listen to my music, you can hear the things that make me who I am kind of happening in all of the music, even though it's not the same genre. And that explanation does not, if you're going to have a genre, you need to boil it down to 1 or 2 words. So my genre is not a 1 or 2 word explanation. It's a concept. And that's not very, that doesn't make for a good soundbite. But that's my genre.
That's why I love the podcast format, because we don't have to talk in sound bites, but I love that explanation because you have these tools and these experiences to draw from and influences. I love that.
Thank you.
NPR called OMAR a thoroughly American opera. And when I think of American opera, my brain goes to Porgy and Bess, and you said in an interview this has nods to Porgy and Bess. How so?
Well, like Porgy and Bess, besides requiring a mostly Black cast, the piece also in part takes place in Charleston. And so I think it would be almost wrong to not have some connection to Porgy and Bess, because I think the connection would be made whether we chose for it to be or not. But we did choose, and you hear it most in the second act when they're actually not in Charleston, though. but it's when when Omar's on a plantation that's a happier environment compared to the one he was in. And I think that, and to me, well, no, there's a couple references. That's one reference. Earlier in the first act, when he first arrives in the US, there's what I think is a nod to Porgy and Bess, because it's his first arrival in the New World. And I don't know if anyone else will get what the reference is, but there's a transition to scene 3, and that's, and to me, inspired by Porgy and Bess, but it's not in the vocal music, and there's no quote or anything like that. But the second act, when he's on the plantation in Fayetteville, the harmonic language is very much sort of jazz influenced, and I think there are some progressions that would evoke orchestral music of about the 1930s. And even though in the opera in that moment it's about 1810, the beauty of opera is not that it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be a history lesson. It's meant to be an emotional experience and telling someone's journey. And so I think that the harmony in that section is meant to evoke a certain way that we people who have lived through cinema in the 20th century see plantation life as it's depicted on the screen. So that's why that harmonic language works in that scene, I think, is because it's a little bit cinematic in the way it tells that part of the story. And it also, but more in general, Omar's story being is actually a quintessential American story, and that's a thing that we need to identify and embrace and be not proud of, but be to understand that it is essential to understanding who we are. And therefore, hearing all of the styles of music, or many of them, that were invented or heavily influenced by African-American people is what would make a quintessential American opera. And because Omar's story is an American story, it gives us Rhiannon and I, perfect excuse to draw on all of those styles of music when they are natural to the story, in the way that I explained that the scene on the plantation is for a kind of 1930s jazz harmonic idiom. So
I also feel like American opera is having a bit of a moment.
sure, for sure.
Is there a um, resurgence in the popularity of opera, American opera, with pieces like Omar and Fire Shut Up My Bones, that's making opera more accessible?
Well, this question will be answered, I think, years from now. So you, the answer will be borne out. Uh, and you're asking me to guess. And so what I'm noticing is that I think we're in a bit of a renaissance of American opera. And that's, as someone who really loves the art form, I'm really happy about that. And the renaissance seems to be not only in just giving more opportunity to new opera, but specifically opera that is about and or written by and or starring people of color. And that's not something that's happened often. And it can't help but be a really interesting addition and invigorating addition to the art form. And so I'm, as someone who's getting a chance to uh, be put in play rather than sitting on the bench, it's super exciting. And is this what we don't know, and what your question implies is this a fad or is it a sea change? And how can we know? I mean, times always change, and so I don't know what they will change to in the future. But I sure hope that the people who are getting to be on the playing field in this renaissance are going to create work that speaks to people in the future and I hope that work is welcomed into the canon and helps us define what we think of as opera and musical theater and who is considered to be a composer of works in those genres.
Absolutely. And when I think of someone like Gershwin, and I love Gershwin, but in writing something like Porgy and Bess, that's appropriating someone else's story. That's not his lived experience. So I find it very exciting to see works like Omar and Fire Shut Up My Bones, which is coming out of a lived experience and not being appropriated by white composers or white storytellers. So that's very exciting to me in this moment. And I hope it's not a fad.
Me too. Me too.
um, I read that you composed your first piece when you were 13 or something like that. What would you tell your 13-year-old self now, having had this career, knowing what you know now?
Oh wow. It, it, um, the most important thing I would tell him is don't give up. Don't give up. Um, and also, so much of that is the thing about artists is that each one is there are things that artists need to learn that they all have in common, and there are things you could tell any particular artist, but then there are things that each artist is also a unique flower, and there are messages that only that artist needs to hear that wouldn't apply to others. So when people ask me, what would you tell your younger self, kind of the implication is that, and then this will apply to everybody, but it won't. Some of what I would tell myself applies only to me. Okay. And so it's really, it's really hard to coach a person both individually and collectively. Individually, what I needed to hear was that the first piece I wrote and completed was actually, so I got it performed. I got that piece performed. And so, and so a message I would have needed to hear then is, don't think this is so easy. Don't think this is this easy. enjoy this. This is not going to happen for a while. Let's not talk about performance number two. That's the one that matters. Performance number two. This is much harder than you think it is. That would have been a message only to me because of my experience. Okay. Um, and it would have been really valuable for someone to tell me that at that moment. And I don't think I would have believed it from anybody but my older self. I wouldn't have believed that from someone else because it was, 13 years old. But uh, any young artist needs to hear the words "don't give up," because there'll be a moment that you want to give up, whether it's at age 14 or at age 24 or at age 54. That moment will come, and you'll have to, or the requirement that the rest of life that is not your art requires a great deal of your time will happen, and you'll have to figure out how to answer those challenges and still be an artist. And who you are is not defined by your primary source of income. If you are an artist and you are being an artist, then you are an artist. And people may be interested in how much money you make doing other things, but that's really just their attempt to reduce you to something they can understand. And if you're an artist, you're going to be something that people don't understand. And you have to be the person who carries that when the world seems not to. And that's a message for an artist of any age.
Does the success of OMAR, and it was critically acclaimed by the New York Times and by Variety, by other folks, does the success of this opera open or reopen the door to other operas you've been interested in working on, like a Rodney King opera, for example?
Well, it's certainly given me opportunity that I never would have had before, no question. And that's all you ever want is a chance, all you ever want is a chance. And I feel like I now have a chance, and that's so exciting. And then when you have spent a long time getting to where you have a chance, you have to think about what you're going to do with that chance. And that's a really great thing to be able to explore, I think, with the knowledge of years of experience, because I don't know how to elaborate on that more than that and have it make any sense at all. But just it's important to. What I'm really blessed with at this point is that I get offered, regardless of the genre, whether it's film or live production, or I get offered really cool projects, just things that if I don't get a chance to participate in, that I can't wait to see when they're complete, because they're really cool projects, and that's amazing. And so the things that I am able to spend my time on are things that I think are, regardless of whether they find an audience or not, there things that I think that I will be proud to show people, decades from now. It's like, not, and it will not be just about, I think I did a good job. It wouldn't be even about that. It would be like, this is content, this is work that you should see. This will make you think about something, or make you have a conversation with people, or you'll be entertained by this in a way you don't expect. And it's such a blessing, I can't even say. And so I want the next operatic project I embark on to be absolutely in that category of things that you think, isn't this something that you are glad that you got a chance to experience, regardless of the fact that I participated in writing it in any way. And also, when you in doing a piece like that, you're writing an opera or a musical, or even producing a film. This is it devotes multi years of your life to make that happen. So when you pick something, it needs to be something that you're going to be excited about 5 years from now. And think about your life and where you were 5 years ago. And then think, okay, what am I going to be excited about 5 years from now? And that's a huge crapshoot, of course, but if you keep that in mind, then it changes your perspective about what you might choose to do because of knowing the amount of the emotional space you're going to have to hold throughout a 5-year period to end up being able to be an audience member of this thing and still feeling like it was valid work that is worth your time to sit there for 2 or 3 hours, whatever. So anyway, I'm excited to have a chance to, factor in all these questions to be able to make choices about what I want to work on. I'm really excited.